What is the saddest thing in your family's history? The saddest I know of is when my dad lost two of his brothers. Brother 1 had just gone through heart bypass surgery and fully refused to recover in the hospital. As soon as he could, and against doctors' wishes, he checked himself out and went home. He then took a hot bath, which caused his sutures to rupture internally. His daughter found him in the tub the next day. Brother 2 was flying to Texas for a business meeting when ATC lost his transponder over North Texas. It took searchers 2 weeks to find the wreckage. Best guess is he had a heart attack and crashed in the middle of nowhere. He was flying alone. We find out, once all the information is in, that they likely died within hours of each other. It's the only time I've ever seen my dad cry. My dad got diagnosed with cancer. After his third round of chemo he was declared cancer-free, but before he could replenish his white blood cell count he caught pneumonia, which ended up being fatal. Kinda drugged up how he beat cancer, and then a relatively common disease ended up killing him. That is a complete opposite of my dad. They found his pancreatic cancer because he went in for a scan to see if his pneumonia was cleared up. Pneumonia saved his life, I guess. My great-great-granddad hung himself. My great-granddad drove his car off a bridge. My granddad stuck a shotgun in his mouth. My dad threatens suicide constantly. Everyone in the family expects it. Then it's my turn. Edit. Man, people are nice. I just wanted to assure everyone that I'm okay, actually doing pretty good. I like where my life is headed. I also don't really be alive in curses. But thanks everyone for the support, you're all great. My great-grandmother died of tuberculosis soon after giving birth to my grandmother. They say she never got to hold her baby before dying. She was only like 25 years old. My great-grandfather made a small beautiful wooden jewelry box with the date she died on, which is one of my family's most treasured possessions. What a beautiful tribute to her. Even though it's such a sad story, I can see why it's so treasured. After my grandma died, she ended up buried somewhere, and my father and grandpa not only had to spend 3 weeks trying to find her body, they had to dig her up themselves and take her body to her lot in the graveyard. She was buried in a mass grave in someone's yard, so they had to find her amongst the other bodies buried there. War really is hell. If you don't mind asking, which war? The Balkan Civil War. My great-great-grandparents had 3 kids, but the mother died and the father was a soldier and had to go to World War I, and so the kids went in an orphanage which was part of a workhouse. He got injured and when he was on leave married his old fiancée so his children could live with their stepmother. However, he had to back to war and didn't have enough time to get them out properly, so he decided to just break them out, and the 2 boys, the oldest one being my great-grandfather, got over the wall fine, but the little sister got stuck, so they left her and just forgot she existed until about 20 years later when she tracked them down and she was pissed off. Damn, that's horrible. My grandmother's sister was stolen when they were really young. I don't know the story in detail, but they reunited when they were already grandmothers. Also, during the Japanese invasion in China, the army had reached the region where my grandma lived and she saw soldiers impaling toddlers/kids in the streets at the end of their bayonets just for fun and laughing about it. There's a whole book written about similar things that the Japanese did to the Chinese. The Rape of Nanking by Iris Chang. My great-grandmother gave birth to twins who died a few days after, without a christening. They were so poor that my great-grandfather sneaked into the local church at night and buried them under a specific tree. It is now in direct line of sight of my great-grandparents' graves. My grandfather had an older sister who was epileptic. It was the 60s, and she was dating a boy who convinced her to stop taking her meds, whatever they were, and she ended up having a seizure and dying as a result. She was 16. What the duck? That is insane. My boyfriend has epilepsy, and anytime he says he doesn't feel right, the first thing I ask him is if he took his meds. I am so afraid of losing him to a seizure that I am so anal about it. We were on vacation this past weekend, and as he was falling asleep he kept twitching a lot, more than usual. It woke me up out of a dead sleep and I grabbed his arm like, "Are you okay?" He just laughed and said he gets twitchy sometimes because of his sleeping meds. Found out fairly recently that my great-grandmother had an unnamed baby girl who died soon after birth. Her birth was registered in her surname only. No death certificate that I can find. That was really common before the mid-20th century. When I was in high school I found out that my mom's first child was stillborn. They never named it either, and she wouldn't even say if it was a boy or a girl. I'm not sure what happened to it, but I never heard mention of a gravesite. My great-great-great-grandpa shot my great-great-great-grandma twice below the left temple. She survived. She ran to the street screaming murderer. He shot himself in the head and died. Her sister-in-law blamed her for getting shot. Here's a link to the news story. The headline is Fatal Frenzy. My grandmother married a man she didn't love. Sad because if she didn't marry him, I wouldn't be alive, but she gave up someone she loved. How's she today? Unfortunately, she died 13 years ago. First time I'm saying this. My grandmother had a heart attack and was recovering. My grandfather refused to pay for her heart medication. She died from another heart attack not long after. He was having an affair, so I think it was part of his plan. He was my favorite family member and I think about him all the time. I don't know how to reconcile this. I'm so sorry. That must be horrible to go through. Child abuse, and the way each child coped. All too common, unfortunately, and a cycle that is hard to break. I'm sorry your family had to go through that. The fact my great-grandfather had almost 200 hectares of land back in World War I but had to sell it for a couple of wheat bags. For context, I'm Lebanese and during World War I, we had a deadly famine in the country because of the Allies' blockade of all merchandise, heavy taxation by the Ottomans and destruction of crops by crickets. I'm sorry for that. Can't believe what your family could do with 200 hectares of land these days. But hey, finally another Lebanese Redditor. During the Vietnam War, my eldest brother thought that he was lucky because he was sent, as an army veterinarian, to Ethiopia to care of Emperor Haile Selassie's SP? Prized horses. He served just shy of 2 years there when he was crossing a street in Addis Ababa and was hit by a truck which fled the scene. When we got the news, my mother fainted to the kitchen floor and it was the first time I ever saw my dad cry. His body was shipped home but there was some problem and it was stuck in customs or whatever for 6 weeks. My parents were never the same and begged my 2 other brothers who ended up serving to not enlist. My great-grandparents, Emma and John, died in the flu pandemic in 1919, within a week of each other, leaving 4 young orphans under the age of 10. Emma's mother, Bridget, took on raising the children. She had a young, teenage son, Jack, and since 5 kids was deemed too many and they didn't want her to break up the orphan sibling group, he was sent back to England to live with an uncle and aunt. Jack didn't see his mother again until after the end of World War II. This story has always crushed me. My grandfather was the only Holocaust survivor of his family. My great-grandmother grew up extremely poor, think 10 kids in a one-room house poor. When she was 8, her parents saved up and bought her a new church dress. The night before she was supposed to wear it for the first time, her house caught on fire. They didn't have fire departments in that area at the time, so she had to watch her house burn down with her new dress inside of it. It's not the most tragic thing in my family history, but that story has always stuck with me. When you have nothing and you lose what little you have, I'm sure it feels worse than have everything and losing it all, because you know how hard it was to get what little you had. My mom is the most tragic person I know. Her mom forced her to have an abortion when she was 15, this was about 1975. She is schizophrenic and the forced abortion drove her into a mental institution for a while. She had me when she was 17. My biological dad was ran off by my grandpa wielding a shotgun and I never knew him. When I was about 7, I had terrible asthma. This, on top of me being autistic, made me a target of a lot of insults from my mom. My mom would get very annoyed at me and would constantly be saying, "Stop that hacking." She worked a late shift and her, and my sister usually ended up sharing a bed since we were very poor. Well, one night I was coughing really bad and mom starts hugging me. Only, she was hugging me so tight that I couldn't breathe. This goes on for a little bit and she finally lets go. She starts crying and I feel bad for her and tell her that I love her, and she starts crying more. When I got older, I figured out that she wasn't just hugging me then, she was trying to crush me to death that night. I was always treated like the black sheep of the family and this just drove me further from my family of origin. Mom's next notable craziness was her husband hooking my younger 12-year-old sister up with a 23-year-old man. I didn't find out about this for years. As I said, I was shunned in the family and I mostly kept to myself anyway. They ended up getting married when my sister turned 18. Fast forward to when I got married at 25. Mom of course fought with my wife and this led to us cutting her off. It went like this for a number of years with us having no contact. After my kid was born, I tried reconnecting with her, But this just led down the same old paths, so I ended up cutting all ties with her after my stepdad, who I was very close with, died of prostate cancer at just 57 years old. After this happened, I was harassed by Mom because my grandfather left my sister and I everything and excluded everyone else out of his will. I thought this was strange because, as much as I loved my grandpa, I never considered myself very close to him. Turns out that the biggest reason why my mom and my younger brother were excluded in the will was because they had murdered my grandpa's dogs. My sister was made executor of the will, and my mom harassed her so much that my sister cut ties with her as well. Last thing I heard about Mom was that my brother was taking care of her. He was always the one who could get along best with her, although before I finally cut ties with my family he told me that one day he hauled off and slapped the shit out of Mom because she was going off on him. She has a bad cocaine habit now, maybe always did for all I know. Apparently it is common for schizophrenics to self-treat with cocaine, and is working as a nurse at a veteran center. There is a lot more I've left unsaid. But my family is straight up nuts and I'm better for leaving them. But Mom is a tragic person, some because of her own upbringing, some because she is mentally ill, and some by her own actions. My grandmother. She really should have never had kids, and I genuinely believe that if she'd grown up in today's world, she'd have chosen to be child-free. As it was, she married young and had 5 children, 2 of which were twins. According to my mom, she was never very affectionate and never seemed terribly happy, but she did what was expected of her and raised them all anyway. Now she's in a senior living facility with worsening dementia. The son she did dote on more than the others only comes around when he wants money, and hasn't gone to see her in a year. He has her car though and went through her house to get everything he wanted. She's in a nice center with friends at least. The shitty uncle didn't want all of her money going to pay for that because that means much less that he gets when she's gone. Luckily, while Grandma was still of sound mind, she made my sister have power of attorney. My sister is an accountant and is making sure my grandma is well taken care of and will be for the rest of her life. It's just sad to see someone who likely didn't want kids go through life doing everything expected of her but never was really happy. My uncle killed a fellow soldier in Vietnam. I'm not supposed to know the full story, but alcohol and family reunions are a thing. I hardly know my uncle as he has driven trucks cross-country ever since I can remember. I was always aware he fought in Vietnam and had PTSD but nothing else. He was drafted to serve in Vietnam, presumably early 70s, and was placed in an infantry unit. The new guys weren't received particularly favorably as he had to always go in front on patrols and the new guys were hardly spoken to and referred to as Corpse 1, 2 etc. He didn't see much action in the form of firefights, apparently it was nothing like the movies. Now and again they were shot at but no lengthy exchanges, but often someone was killed or severely wounded. Most of the casualties came from mines or explosive devices that my uncle's unit encountered on patrol. Fairly quickly the other 2 new guys were killed by booby traps, leaving my uncle as the only new guy. He was bullied quite badly, beaten up a few times when he requested a move to a less dangerous position, and was told he was just there to be killed so that the other unit members could survive. He started having nightmares and would wake up screaming, but that just led to the other guys in his unit tying him up and bandaging his mouth. He basically cracked, and one day when back at a base he shot dead the worst one in his unit and just walked up to an officer and told him what he did. My uncle must have had a good lawyer or something, as he served just under 10 years in prison before he was released. My grandfather's uncle was a farmer from Missouri and fought in World War I, even though farmers were supposed to be exempt from fighting. He was killed in action in Germany November 2, 1918, a week before the armistice was signed to end the war. His family got a letter from the government informing them of his death, and that they should be proud of his sacrifice. They thought this was extremely condescending, and my dad still sounds bitter whenever it's brought up. Edit. A quick skim of the Wikipedia article for the Selective Service Act of 1917, the U.S. World War I draft, tells me he would have been in Group 3, temporarily exempted but available for military service due to his work as a farmer. Losing 3 family members in a car accident/explosion in Houston, colliding with a disabled RV on the side of the road and an 18-wheeler truck. It happened 20 years ago yesterday, July 29th. One of the boys was like a brother to me. He was actually alive and on fire when he got out of the burning vehicle. He said something, then died. There is nothing in the world that can fill the hole that left inside my heart. In my family we've only ever had one famous family member. Unfortunately I've never met her. She was a TV and movie star, One day after celebrating she got real drunk and went to go puke her guts out in the toilet. She passed out with her head in the toilet and drowned. Lupe Velez? I'm surprised someone got it. My grandfather was a Nazi soldier. This isn't really a sad story, it's more like a true love story. My grandfather married my grandmother who was a Jew. He saved her from getting captured and brought to Bergen-Belsen. They then went on and immigrated to the US to get married. They stay with us now since they are growing old, and every Wednesday we go to get ice cream. It's the cutest thing. Did he believe in Nazi ideology or was he forced to become a soldier? If he was forced into it and didn't believe, then he wasn't a Nazi. 9 of my ancestors were killed by the Russians in World War II. Only 3 of them were soldiers. My great-grandaunt went down with her 2 little childs when the Wilhelm Gustloff sunk. 10,000 people died in the ship, and what happened? The Russian submarine commander who sunk the ship became the title hero of the Soviet Union, a hero who killed 10,000 civilians. My grandmother fled out of Pommern. I don't know how it is called in English. The only thing she has from her old home is one bracelet. Pommern in English is Pomerania. Thanks for listening to another episode of Reddit X. Subscribe and activate the notification bell so you won't miss any stories. Feel free to share your own stories below in the comments. Have a good day.